In today's video, we're going to be adding hitboxes to our game for Adventure Girl and for her melee animation so she can deal damage to enemies. And then we're also going to add a hitbox to the ground so we stop having the ability to jump on zombies' heads, because I think that looks ridiculous. So really quickly, I want to start by just talking about why we need a hitbox. And the reason we need a hitbox is currently in the game we have this problem. If Adventure Girl is running and she runs into a zombie such that even just the very tip of her hat touches the zombie, she immediately takes damage. And we don't want that, because as a player that feels very weird. It feels like the zombie hit us when we weren't even actually touching them. And so what we want to say is we basically want to create a box and say we're only going to deal damage to Adventure Girl if the zombie is actually touching this sort of box that's like that is a little bit more in her center, that actually looks like it would be hitting her. So now in this case, if the zombie touched us here, for instance, we wouldn't be taking damage yet because the zombie hasn't gotten all the way to the hitbox. We'd only take damage if we got to here. We have the same thing with Adventure Girl's melee animation. So when Adventure Girl does a melee, we sort of want to draw a box. Instead of just relying on where her sprite is, we want to draw a box that sort of says, here's where the damage is from the knife is going to be. And so what we probably want to do is something like this. We want to say, when she swings her knife, we're going to create a little hitbox right here. And that hitbox, anything in that hitbox, if the zombie is touching that hitbox, then the zombie takes damage because they're in the hitbox of her knife. And that just gives us a lot more fine-tuned control over where that knife actually can hit. And it'll end up feeling a lot better than if you try to just do it off of her actual player animations. It works a lot better with the hitbox. So let's start out by creating a hitbox for Adventure Girl. And so the first thing I'm going to do is create a new sprite, and I'm going to do it from Paint, and I'm going to call it Adventure Girl Hitbox. Then what I want to do is go into Adventure Girl and find one of her costumes, maybe like an idol costume, something here, like this one will work fine. And I want to use this sort of as a reference so I know how big to draw the hitbox. So I'm going to copy that and paste it into here. And then I'm going to grab the square tool, and I'm just going to draw where I think my hitbox should be. So I'm going to have it be right here. You're going to have to be really very close to her to actually deal damage. And then once you have a hitbox you like, you can go ahead and select your character and delete them because we were just using them for reference. And now we have our hitbox that's drawn to about the shape we want for Adventure Girl. We also need to change its size down to 30 because that's how large Adventure Girl is. And then we're going to need code that has it go to Adventure Girl forever. So we're going to say when we click start, we're going to forever go to Adventure Girl's position. And now when we click start, you'll see that the hitbox follows her around. And she also falls through the floor because we haven't done a ground hitbox yet, and so it's a little glitchy. The other problem you might be noticing, besides the fact that we slowly fall through the ground, is that when we're going to the right, this looks pretty good. It covers her pretty well. But when we go to the left, we sort of have this big chunk of her missing. That's because this hitbox is a little bit off-center. And so we're going to have a variable that's we're going to track whatever Adventure Girl's direction is, and if she's facing to the left, we're going to correct the hitbox so it's actually all the way over her. To do that, of course, the first thing we're going to need is to get Adventure Girl's direction in this hitbox sprite, which we currently don't have access to, because usually you only have access to a sprite's XY position if you're in that sprite. So the first thing we want to do is sort of make her XY position global, make it available in all of the other sprites. To do that, we're going to start by creating a variable, and the variable I'm going to create is called Adventure Girl Direction, and this one is for all sprites. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create when we click start, we're going to forever set her direction to whatever her direction is. So we're going to set her direction variable to whatever her current direction is, to direction, just like this. And so now when we click start, you'll see we have her direction in this variable that we can access in all of our other sprites. So now back over in Adventure Girl's hitbox, what we want to do is check if we're facing to the left, which means we're facing a negative direction. And if we are facing a negative direction, we want to shift this box over to the right a little bit so it covers her a little better. And so to do that, I'm going to go into controls and grab an if statement. And what we're going to check is if our direction, if Adventure Girl's direction is less than 0. So if it's a negative number, if it's less than 0, then we're going to just shift this over on the x-axis a little bit here. So I'm going to say change x by 10. And so now when I click start, that looks like it lines up a lot better to me. That covers her much better on both sides. So now that we have the hitbox, the next thing I want to do is make Adventure Girl's damage based on the hitbox, not on her, because currently it's still doing damage when the zombie hits her. And so to do that, we're just going to take all of the code we use to manage health, and we're going to move it from Adventure Girl into the hitbox. And so what you can now almost think of this as is Adventure Girl is just sort of our sprite and our image. The hitbox is where we actually calculate how she's being hit and what her health is. And so now in the hitbox we have this code that sets her health to 2. And now what we're checking is if the hitbox is touching a zombie sprite, then we change her health by -1 and wait 1 second instead of doing it on her. Now it doesn't matter if her character is touching a zombie, it only matters if her hitbox is touching a zombie, but since it follows her around, it should be about the same. But now you'll see when we run into a zombie, we don't do damage. See, like this isn't dealing damage to us right away. We have a little bit more time now, and you have to wait for it to get all the way to the hitbox for the damage to actually be done to Adventure Girl. Alright, so now that this logic works, the next thing we want to do is we don't actually want this hitbox to be visible. It looks pretty ugly to have this giant box over Adventure Girl. Usually when I first did this, I thought, well, I'll just hide it. Unfortunately, if you hide something, it no longer exists. You can't do any calculations. If something's hidden, you can't detect if it's touching something else. So what we have to do instead is use the ghost effect. So if you go into your looks, there's an option here called set effect. And what we want to do is right when we click start, we're going to set the ghost effect to 100%. And essentially that's going to mean the object still exists in our game, but it's totally transparent and we won't be able to see it. So now when I click start, you'll see that's gone. And then when we run into our zombie, we still have it still using the hitbox. It doesn't damage her like when she touches the hat anymore. But the hitbox still exists and she'll get damaged when the zombie runs into her. So now that we have that, the other thing I want to do is create the hitbox for her melee attack. And so just like before, I'm going to go ahead and create a new sprite. And this one I'm going to call melee hitbox. And once again, I'm going to go grab a template of her. I'm going to go grab one of her knife animations. I think this one will work pretty well. And we're going to copy it over into here so I have something to work off of. Okay, so now I want to draw the box where I think it should be. And so I think the damage for her knife needs to probably extend a little bit past her knife. I think something like this will be about right. We want to make it pretty wide so that the player feels like they actually have a fair range to hit the zombie in. This might be a little too far. You can adjust this to whatever you want. I think I'm going to start it. I think I'm going to start it right here, and we'll see if that's good enough. And then just like before, we can go ahead and delete our reference, and then we can change the size down to 30 so it's the right scale for everything else. So now the process is very similar for this hitbox. We're going to go back into the code, and we're going to have this follow Adventure Girl around. So when we click start, we're going to forever go to her location, go to Adventure Girl, and we lined this all up so that it would be in the right place on her right, which it is, and that looks good. But if we go to the left, you'll notice we have the same problem where it's off. It should be in front of her, but it says way back here. So once again, we need to check if we're facing left. So we're going to go ahead and grab an if, and we're going to say if our direction is less than 0. So if our Adventure Girl direction is less than 0, then we're going to move this. This time we need to move it to the left, it looks like. So that'll be -x. So we will go ahead and grab change x by, and we'll start by trying, let's take 25. That's not enough, so let's keep going. I think maybe 50. It's quite a ways over. That looks better. I think that's about the same. Maybe like 55 or 52, 53. That looks right to me. I like that. So now that we have this hitbox, we want this hitbox to do damage to zombies. So we're going to go into the zombie code, and we're going to check if, I'm just going to copy this actually, we're going to say if we are touching, not Adventure Girl now, but the melee hitbox, then we'll decrease zombie health, and I'll just make it -4 for now. We'll just have it kill them right away. And so now when we click start, you'll notice if I turn around and the zombie hits the hitbox, then they die right away. This obviously isn't quite what we want. We want this hitbox only to show when she's doing her melee animation. And so to do that, I'm going to use some broadcasts, and we're going to show and hide this melee box only when she's actually doing her melee attack. So to start with, I'm going to have the melee box hidden completely because we don't need it right away. And then the next thing I want to do is I'm going to create two messages here. So we're going to have a when I receive melee start, and we're also going to have a when I receive melee end. And when we receive melee start, we're going to show the hitbox so that it can interact with the game. And when we receive melee end, we'll hide it. And then on click start, we also hide it. So now back in Adventure Girl, what I can do is I can go into her melee code here, and we can create those broadcast messages. So I can say broadcast start melee when we start the melee, and then I'll broadcast end melee after her animation finishes. And so now what you're going to see is there's no hitbox, but whenever I hit C, that hitbox shows up. And so there we go, got our zombie. The other thing we of course want to do is make our hitbox completely transparent so we're not seeing it on the screen. So to do that, we're going to go to Set Effect, and we're going to change the Ghost Effect to 100% so it's totally transparent. And now this should all look pretty good. So now the zombie shows up, we swing the knife, and we do damage to the zombie. There's a few bugs left, so one thing I want to do first is also want to make the ground a hitbox, because otherwise you get this weird error where she can like fall through the ground like we were seeing earlier. And so to do that, again, very similar process. We're going to start by creating a new sprite, and I just want to create a line. I'm just going to draw a line, maybe make it like 15, make it fairly thick, like 15, and then we're just going to drag it right across the center here. And then you want to put that line wherever you want it, so I want it right on the ground level. I think right here should work. And then in its code, this one we don't need to have go anywhere. This is just this doesn't need to follow her or anything. It's just where the ground is going to be. And so all we need to do is when we click start, we want to set its ghost effect to 100%. So we will say set ghost to 100, and that'll make our ground totally not show up, but the object's still there. And so then in Adventure Girl, instead of using this touching color thing, which can get really messy because sometimes colors get in front of each other and it causes issues, instead of using the color thing, we can check if we were touching that that sprite, that background. And let me rename this real quick to ground hitbox. Perfect. Okay, so now back in Adventure Girl, we can say as long as we are not touching the ground hitbox. There it is. Oops, that's Adventure Girl hitbox. Ground hitbox, there we go. And then we'll need the same thing down here where we're doing our jumping, where we're making sure she can only jump if she's on the ground. Those will also need to be, instead of touching color, we're going to switch both of those to ground hitbox also. Perfect. So now when we run this, we should see that it works exactly the same way, but now we're using the hitbox for the ground instead of just using a color, which will make this just less glitchy in the future. And this is looking pretty good. There's still one more bug left. If I click start and we find a zombie here, you'll notice that if I kill the zombie but then I run, the zombie like follows me here. I'll show it one more time. So I kill the zombie, but then the zombie like moves with my character, which they shouldn't be doing. The zombie should be staying still once they're dead. So the reason that happens is that when we do our death animation here and we run this little if statement right here where we do the animation and then delete the clone, while this animation is running, none of this other code runs. And some of this code we don't want to run. Some of this code is like switching through the walking animations, and we don't want those to run because now the zombie's dead and it should be doing the death animations. But some of the code, remember, if you remember way back to our scrolling backgrounds video, some of this code is making the zombie stay in the right spot when Adventure Girl moves. And the problem is that code's not running either, so it looks like it just follows her around instead. And so essentially what I'm going to do is rearrange a little bit of the code here. I should have written this in a different order when I first started. So I'm going to take out this part where we point towards Adventure Girl, and I'm going to take out this, and there's basically three parts here. There's the part where we set the zombie to move, and then there's the part where we set its position against the background, and then there's the part where we do its walking animations. So what we need is we need this part to run all the time, even if the zombie is dead. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that as the first thing that happens, and then I want to add an if statement around all of this stuff that checks that the zombie has to be alive first. So we'll say if our zombie health has to be greater than 0. Otherwise it won't run all of this code to make the zombie move, but it will still run this code. So then I can put this stuff back inside of our forever loop here. But we do still have an issue here, and it's that now this code still won't run if this if statement is running, right? When you get inside of an if statement, it starts running these, and it's not running this at the same time. To make two parts of code run at the same time, what we need to do is move this out to another block. So what I'm going to do is delete this if zombie's health is less than 1 thing, and instead we're going to put all the death animations under this repeat until zombie's health is less than 1. And so then all of the health and death stuff is handled over here, and then we can move, and then only the animations and zombies' positions are handled over here. You might need to watch that a few times. I'm sorry if that's a little confusing. It's totally my fault. I wrote the code badly when I started. But if you'll notice, when we start the game now, you're going to see that when we kill a zombie, they actually stay still correctly in the spot they're supposed to, instead of following us around the whole time. And that's everything for this video. Thank you for bearing with me, guys, and I will see you in the next one where we talk about sound design and how to make sounds come from different sides in this game.